Welcome to Life After Corporate, your ultimate guide for making the leap from corporate leader to entrepreneur. I'm Deb Boulanger, entrepreneur, executive leader, and founder of the Launch Lab for Women Entrepreneurs. This is your time to break through the glass ceiling once and for all and get your ticket to the C-suite. Come back each week to get the leading strategies, advice, and tools that will give you the skills and confidence you need to replace your corporate paycheck. Are you ready? Let's go. Episode 39, The Journey of the Faith-Based Entrepreneur. Welcome back to another episode of Life After Corporate, my friend. And if you're listening for the first time, welcome home. It's here that you will get a multidimensional view of what it takes to step off that corporate ladder and make an impact as an entrepreneur. From the very practical steps that it takes to ensure you have an idea that will work, to the emotional ups and downs of this journey, to the skills you need to keep focused and keep going and growing even in adversity. And today you will be blessed with a conversation with my special guest, Ambassador Suzan Johnson-Cook, who is now the founder of the Global Black Women's Chamber of Commerce. She is also a White House Fellow and former Ambassador for International Religious Freedom under President Barack Obama and policy advisor to President Bill Clinton. Ambassador Sujay, as she is known, has now become a personal friend, confidant, and advisor. I'm speaking with her today about the role of faith in the entrepreneurial journey. Regardless of your beliefs, the journey of the purpose-driven entrepreneur is one that is guided by something bigger than financial success. It truly is a path of service. So let's dive into our conversation today about the entrepreneurial journey with the amazing Ambassador Sujay. Welcome to Life After Corporate, Ambassador.
It's an honor to be with you, and thank you for the invitation.
Oh, I have been waiting for this conversation, and I always share with our listeners how we met, because everyone I have on this program is someone who I know in real life and respect a great deal. And we met over coffee a couple of years ago as you were a speaker at the Empowering a Billion Women Billionaire Weekend for Women with Ingrid Vanderveld, who is a mutual friend. And we both live in Sag Harbor sometimes. You're here sometimes. I'm here all the time. And reached out and we met for coffee. And I have to tell you, I was a little bit nervous about meeting a global ambassador, someone who worked with President Barack Obama, who's been in the White House. And we sat down, we had coffee, and we bonded over being mothers. We talked about our boys. So It was just, thank you for being so accessible and such a wonderful human being in my life.
Well, thank you. And mutually, I give the same admiration. And I thank Ingrid. I think she's a great connector. And, there's so many relationships that came through her, by her, via her. And I think the same with us. Like, we have met, and then there are so many people who come in our lives. So I think connection is really what the theme really is when we're talking about faith entrepreneurs, faith-based, faith-infused, that there's a connection to a power that's bigger than us, to a purpose that's bigger than us. And so we try to find that connection. I think life is a journey about where do we find the connections that help us to get through. And the one consistent, stable connection is with what some call the divine, which others call by other names, but it is that person, that creator that you feel is guiding you and guarding you all along the way.
Absolutely. And I remember your amazing Selah retreat, and you invited me to come speak that weekend to a group of women ministers. And I kept thinking, what path of entrepreneurship am I talking about to a group of women ministers? And I found so many wonderful connections there. And that's when my eyes were opened that the path to minister the faith-based journey is really one of entrepreneurship as well. So let's talk about your amazing journey from, I read in Wikipedia today, I was like, does Sujay have a background in corporate? And I found out you did.
Yeah.
So talk about the beginning to where you are now.
Well, first of all, I was born into a faith family. So it wasn't something I had to try to find along the way. And I think that that's really, really important because it kept me grounded from a little girl. So for us, it was the Black church world that was our center for education, for social life, and then for our spiritual life. So I had people surrounding me that were always saying, yes, you can. So failure really wasn't an option. And so they gave me my first summer jobs. And one of my very first summer jobs was one with my parents who had started a business, which was a watch guard security agency, which started in our home when I was 6 years old. So I'm a third generation entrepreneur. Their parents before them were also business owners. But then, in the church setting, it was, what school are you going to? What's your summer job going to be? And if you said, well, I don't really have one, the call was made. So I learned about connections and relationships very early. So my summer jobs were with my parents. And then it was with what they used to call Ma Bell, the New York telephone company, which is now Verizon and AT&T. It's split. But back then it was called Ma Bell. And it was a corporate America that I was introduced to as a teenager. First of all, their pay was incredible for teenagers. Their benefits were incredible. And if I were in a different genre, I would have probably stayed with them as many of my friends did and made a career out of it. But I wanted to see the world. And so I knew that the corporate stop was just a stop for me in the summer. I also felt a calling in terms of that connection. I always felt a calling to a higher power. And then I just wanted to be very global. So I studied abroad at age 14. I went to Riverdale Country School, which was this, elite prep school. I lived in the South Bronx. And so my parents made sure I came home every day so I could get grounded to go back. But it was that trip in 10th grade at 14 years old where I had to learn how to navigate, get my passport, learn how to navigate the globe, and really live as a teenager in another culture that really was life-changing for me. And so I knew there was more than just the Bronx, New York. I knew that there was more than Harlem, New York. And although they were wonderful places for me to grow up and develop and mature, that I really knew I was going to be a world something. I didn't know if it was going to be world leader, but I knew it was going to be a world something. And so that hunger for the globe continued. So after college, I went on a program called Operation Crossroads Africa, where we lived abroad, and I lived in Ghana, West Africa. And then it was with a bunch of college students, college graduates, and we had to learn how to navigate our way around the continent. We went to 9 different countries. And so I knew there was a hunger for me to understand systems, how they worked, understand cultures that were different than mine and how they worked. I knew that there was something about sisterhood and really teamwork because we had to depend on each other in these foreign countries when nobody else was with us, when we couldn't speak the language. And so I understood there was an importance to being a team player. And then eventually I became a team leader because people were always saying, kind of, how do we do this? What do you do? How do you translate this? And so leadership began for me early, which also meant entrepreneurship was going to begin for me early. I had to learn in corporate America how to understand systems, how to be accountable and responsible. But I also knew that because of my parents who had started this business in our home, that there was a financial freedom in entrepreneurship that wouldn't exist anywhere else. So I was able to come all the way through college with no student debt, which was a major...
That is amazing.
What major victory. Yeah, it was a gift. It was a gift. So I could start ahead of my peers because I didn't have to worry about paying someone back. So that was the beginning of my journey. Fast forward, I think that the middle of my journey had a little corporate in it, but I was always, even though I worked for someone else, I always had kind of a side gig for myself because I understood savings, I understood investing, and I understood what financial freedom meant. And I think with that combined with my faith helped me to soar.
Your journey is so inspiring. And, sometimes I sit here and I think, oh my God, from the corporate entrepreneurial journey, that hunger and thirst for being a global world player, being a global world citizen. And then, the call to ministry. So how did that happen? Connect the dots for us. When was it that you decided that the ministry was your next step?
Well, we call it a calling, and everybody in life has a calling. Mine was to ministry. But when I was 11 years old, there was a woman she's now deceased a year ago. Her name was Katie Geneva Cannon. And she was the first female minister I met. Parents, because they were Southerners who came north in the Black migration, it was very important for them to send their kids what they called down south every summer so that we would know our real historical roots. And so all the first cousins and second cousins would stay with my grandmother. And it was there that Katie Geneva Cannon was a student in Concord, North Carolina, where NASCAR racing is. And she would come to our home. We were the family that every college student has kind of a family where you can go get a good meal and a shower. So we were the family that she came to. And so when my eyes laid eyes on her, it was the first role model of a woman who could do ministry. I was 13 years old. So I kind of couldn't process it, but I knew in my spirit that this was a woman that I was going to be walking beside for a long time, and that I had the possibility of being a minister. But I had the normal teenage life. I went to college, first at Fisk University, a historically Black university, but I transferred to Emerson College in Boston. And in Boston, we went to this church called St. Paul AME, which was in Cambridge, Mass. So all the students from Harvard, MIT, Emerson, all the schools, because, Boston's a school town, we found ourselves in this church called St. Paul AME, African Methodist Episcopal, with this dynamic ministry couple, John and Cecilia Bryant. So it was the first time I saw myself as Black. I could be brilliant. I could also be Afrocentric, and that I could express all of who I was, because we don't fit into this little box. And the world says you got to be one thing. Well, my body was screaming to do more than one thing. So I was always like, where do I find me? And it was in this place where we sang in this choir, and about 40 of us became ministers. I mean, like famous ministers out of this particular setting. And so it was there. I was 17 when I went there, 19 when I graduated. It was there that I knew that I wanted to express all of these gifts through ministry. And so I was affirmed then. I didn't actually come into ministry until age 23. And so really 4 decades of my life have been as a minister, and now being able to express my gifts in many places, not just the church, but actually now go back to the world, that globe that I really wanted to be a part of. And so now I'm full circle. Instead of the world, me going to the world, now the world comes to me. And it's an awesome, awesome experience.
The theme that runs through your story is this intense self-awareness, almost uncanny for a girl of 14, 15, 16, 17, of really being in touch with that inspires you and calls you. And for many young girls, it's a really difficult and confusing time. So it's amazing how far you excelled. Actually, you and I were in Cambridge at the same time.
Wow.
And I'm sitting here thinking, I went to Lesley College,
Yes.
now Lesley University, right across from Harvard Law. And I wish I had known. I was going to I think it was St. Paul's, but it was in Boston. I would go to the Park Street.
Yes. Okay.
Park Street Church in Boston.
Yes.
And so funny that we could have actually been on the same T line.
Exactly. But I mean,
in and out of town.
But the fact that we were college students and faith was important to us even then, we did all the stuff college students did now. We hung out, we partied. But for us, Sunday mornings was like really important that we got that spiritual grip, And so we walked with a certain amount of morality and decency. Like we weren't going to go too far out the box. We partied. We certainly had the social life, but we weren't going to go too much out of the lines. We weren't going to color too, because for one, we wanted to please our parents. We understood the sacrifice our parents made to get us to that point. And so we were inviting our parents up to the events that we were having, the plays that I was directing, because we were like, we want to make you proud. And we also thank you for giving us the kind of support system and the surroundings that allowed us to fly. They didn't clip my wings at all. They were like, fly girl, and you have a home to come back to, and you have a whole lot of people that not only are counting on you, but also that are proud of you. And that's a different kind of thing. When people are always counting on you, that means you have to always give back. But because they gave so much to me, it was a no-brainer. Yes, not only am I going to give back, but I'm going to bless the world, because I leave here whole. I don't leave here broken. I leave home whole, so I'm going to come back whole. And I think that is so important. Who you surround yourself with, whether it's your family, not everybody has that family structure, whether it's your faith family, which is your extended family, and then the friends that you have who have a same kind of vision as you. They may not be going the same place, but we're all going a direction that's positive. And I think that is so important.
So important. And, coming back to the connection which is where we started the conversation with, and who you're connecting to, what a blessed childhood, what a blessed childhood to have parents who instilled that belief and that faith in you and gave you all the support, never clipped your wings. I mean, that's just an amazing story. And unfortunately, a rarity in some ways in our society today. So I'm curious, was there any time in your journey that you doubted yourself or doubted that you were on the right path? Was it always clear sailing for you and confidence and action and insight and affirmation?
Oh no, there was, we don't talk about it often, but I think certainly with the George Floyd case and what's happened with Black Lives Matter, there is for an African American always subtle and sometimes overt racism. And for me, going into a traditionally male path, it was also sexism. So I had to deal with both. And there are times that it makes you feel like you're not doing right, that you are kind of off, where actually they're really kind of beating down your esteem. And so when we talk about systemic racism and systemic sexism, it means that everyone in that system has been conditioned to treat you a certain way, to see you a certain way. So when I came into ministry, there were men who were like, you're not called. And, you shouldn't be here. You really shouldn't be here. When I came into even places like the ambassadorship, there were people like, this is something pretty much that a white conservative had. And so kind of, how did this Black Baptist woman from the Bronx get here? And so you had to work around it and navigate. Of course, I've ended up on top, but there are places and times that people were not so kind. And so you had to kind of sometimes just go inward, because you can't always say you're being racist. You can't always come out and say you're being sexist. So you have to deal with it. And I think for African Americans, unfortunately, George Floyd had to die. But for us, it was the first time white America saw what we have been seeing all of our lives. And so for us, it was a moment that finally somebody's getting it. I mean, so many had to die, and there was so many in a row. George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and so many died, and Breonna Taylor. And finally, it was like, we can't take it anymore. And so the young people just kind of said, we're going to express ourselves openly. And I believe in peaceful protests. I don't believe in violence, but it was like someone had to say something. And our generation took it, but there's a generation now that says, we're not standing for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was such an eye-opener. And I remember you and I having a very private conversation about when you were the chaplain of the New York City Police Department and why you decided to be chaplain in the police department at that time. Do you want to share that story?
Yeah, very much. Well, I was pastoring a church downtown in Lower Manhattan. First of all, it was a church that none of the men wanted. So I kind of got it. Kind of like people thought, okay, she's not going to do anything with it. It'll die. But at least we could say we gave a woman a church, And because of my connections outside of the church world, my brother's political connections, my parents' business connections, all the corporate connections, all of the worlds came together and they said, we're going to support her. She's in this church all alone. And so all of them began to support me. Little did I know that down the block was the police headquarters. And so I formed this service called Lunch Hour of Power, which I'm trying to revive digitally on Wednesdays at noon on YouTube. But it was a service for the business community. And at lunchtime on Wednesdays, literally hundreds of people will pile into this church from the city agencies, because, downtown in New York, you're next to everything, the Wall Streeters, the police headquarters. And so police brass started coming to these services. And they said, look, this is our Wednesday pastor. And they went back to then Commissioner Ben Ward, who was the first African-American police commissioner. And they said, we need this woman. I had no idea there were chaplains for the city of New York. I had no idea there were no women. So when the women went in, they fought for me. They held the position. And so I kind of had to say yes. But it was also during the period of police killings, when the most famous one was Diallo, Amadou Diallo. And then there were many people protesting from the Black community. And I said, you know what, some of us need to be inside, because of course the call came out, you're going to march with us. And I said, some of us need to be on the inside, because I have a direct path. I have a direct connection to the police commissioner's office. We were at the rank of inspectors, so we could go up to the floor that the commissioner was on, press the elevator button, and we were there, and they would take our meeting. So I said, some of us have so many before us, number one, paid the dues for some of us to be at the table. So if some of us are at the table, then we have to use that right. We have to take our seat at the table. Others need to apply the pressure from the outside. And between the two of them, someone's going to hear us. And so when there were internal issues around racism, particularly with Black officers not getting the same pay or not getting the same disability issues as white officers, I was able to have a conversation. And I know that there were places that I gently moved the needle. I can't tell you how much it did, but I know I moved the needle. Fast forward, 9/11 comes. I am on the front lines of 9/11 as one of 8 police chaplains. And the 911 operators were mainly women of color. And they were the ones on the phone with people as they were perishing and plunging to their deaths. They said, we want Reverend Johnson to come, because you talk about post-traumatic stress. No one talks about traumatic stress that you're going through. It's not
in the moment.
In the moment. We don't even have a word for it. It's not pre-traumatic and it's not post. It's like, it's traumatic stress right now. And they were really, really internally and emotionally crumbling. And so to be the woman that's in the spot, that's called, that's connected for that moment, my faith and my entrepreneurship and all of the worlds came together. And had I not had faith, I would not have been able to be the person who was there to help others go through their faith walk or begin their faith journey.
That was one of the hardest points in our history, our recent history.
Yes.
And it was almost like you were providing emotional and spiritual triage.
That's a good word. I hadn't even thought of it that way. Yes. And so when when New York opened up, you remember we were closed for like 4 days for the first time in the history of New York. Subways were shut, downtown was shut, but police chaplains, had to be on the job, on the front lines. And so when we reopened, it was the following Wednesday, and I had one of my lunch hour services. And I remember white, Black, white collar, blue collar workers all piling into this church where I did the lunchtime service. And they came in with such fear because they had been called back to work, but they really were afraid to go back to work. And we were there to be a pastor, not just for a city, but actually nationally, becoming like America's chaplain, because people were calling on me from all over saying, what do we do? It just didn't hit the World Trade Centers. It hit America. And so it was a traumatic time. Triage. I really like that word. We were providing spiritual triage to a nation. And I think that's sort of what we're going to see coming out of this pandemic or going through this pandemic. But it's different because this happened all at one time and we had a known enemy, and we had, it happened within 2 day period. This pandemic has shut the world down, and there's going to be a need for spiritual triage again, as we go through it, and certainly post pandemic.
And the influence on the inside is almost a theme for your entire career.
Right. One other point just about the
Yeah.
triage. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're corporate or blue collar.
Mhm.
When COVID hits, when a pandemic hits, when 9/11 hits, it's a great equalizer because people aren't talking about your rank. They're asking, how do we get healing and wholeness again? And so it's a wonderful moment for God to actually bring us together again for those who will hear and those who walk in a spiritual walk. And so that's what the call is for now. That's what the call is for the White House.
So we were just talking about the triage, the emotional triage and the spiritual triage after 9/11, and that we're in a similar place right now with the pandemic and with Black Lives Matter. I mean, in many senses, and the political climate as well, that everything is rather raw and real, and people are looking for solid ground. They're looking for a sense of connection, a sense of purpose, a connection to their higher power. So thank you for that. That was a beautiful connecting point. And, I too, at that point in time, I went to see a naturopath, and he said, "You're one of the walking wounded." Just being an empath, being so
Yes.
empathetic. And the same has happened with this COVID pandemic and Black Lives Matter. So there's fallout way beyond those that are immediately affected by the disease or by the disaster. But those of us who are looking to find solid ground because things have been shaken.
Yeah, there's also a book called The Wounded Healer, similar to what your friend said, your guide said to you, because so many of us are walking around with wounds, and I think you have to find your healing place and places, your healing surroundings. So you had started at the beginning of our conversation saying, I live in Sag Harbor sometimes. Well, it's my peace place. And so when COVID hit, there was no question for me where I was going to be. I needed to be in my peace place, because you have to have some place that brings you stability. I mean, that's what faith really is, that when everything else is wobbly and the world kind of seems like it's going out of control, then you have to find a peace place. So some of us can go totally inward and find it there. Some meditate, some pray, some do yoga, and that's one way. But you also have to have surroundings that support that. So you can't be in a chaotic place and say, I'm going to find my peace place. So I think your surroundings, and that comprises of the place that you live or that you call home for that time. It also with the surroundings of the people you call friends for that time. And all of that, so I don't think it was any accident that I met Ivy, who's a woman of faith and whose faith is very important to her. Ivy connects me with you. Your faith is important. We find out that we were going to faith places at the same time while we was in school, a few blocks from each other. I don't think that there's any accident in that. In fact, I think there are no accidents. I think there's only coincidences and providence. And so I think that this was a providential moment, a providential friendship. And I think that when we talked about path, as we began this conversation, that we're all always on this path, and some of us are blazing trails, but at some point you have to stop. And that's what Selah means. That's why I have the retreat. Selah is a word in the Bible that's used 71 times. And, if you're reading the Psalms, for those who read the Old Testament, because it's a Judeo-Christian book, the word has been in there 71 times, Selah. And you're not supposed to speak it. You're not supposed to read it. You just kind of pause. And when I realized what it meant that David, who was a harpist and a singer, is told to stop, just pause, a musical rest, so that in between this wonderful concerto and this wonderful one, pause for a minute. Let people kind of take it all in and reflect on what you've just done. And so what I call the Selah retreat is where your self meets your soul. and you pause for just a minute by the seashore. And so I'm really intentional about going by water because that's what speaks to me. But it also is having people to leave their location and go to a place where you can find peace and rest. So I'm not one who's great on staycations, except during COVID, but I'm one that says, find your peace places, because sometimes you have to relocate from where you are in order to find it.
Wow, that was so beautifully said. And yeah, there was no accident in our meeting or in me joining you on that Selah retreat, which I didn't question when you asked me. I just said yes immediately. I was honored to be asked to join you, and
Yes.
how that renewed my faith. It opened up a whole world that I had truthfully left behind. I'd gotten into meditation and Buddhism and connecting to spirit and higher power in that way, but I had not uttered the words God before. And now God is my CEO of my business, and so
I love it. I love it.
Thank you for that. That was
Yes.
all you, Sujay.
Oh, wow.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about spiritual entrepreneurship and staying true to the one who is the true leader. So for many women of faith, there's sometimes a divide between their beliefs and their business. And
Yes.
so love your thoughts on that.
Yes. So I was a White House Fellow 93, 94. The White House Fellowship is wonderful for young leaders between the ages of 25 and 35. It's really when you should be a fellow. But it's a bipartisan, competitive program for you to, if you're selected, you're going to work at the executive level of government with either the president, the vice president, or a cabinet secretary. And so it was created by Lyndon Johnson some 60 some years ago so that young leaders can really find out how our government works and how intergovernment works. And so it was a fascinating experience. So when you're going through the competition, which is a year, you have to write policy, you have to write a memorandum to the president, what you would be like if you were next to this highest person in government. And so it's very highly competitive. So you're memorizing Time magazine and you're looking at we didn't have CNN back then, but you're looking at all of the television stuff to see kind of what are the issues of the day, the headlines of the day, and you're memorizing them so that you can have a conversation should you be asked by the president of the United States. So I went in as a faith person. I was the first Baptist pastor they had ever had in the history of the White House Fellowship. And so they kind of really weren't sure where to place me when I first went, but I went in with Bill Clinton. I went in authentically me, but I also had memorized, healthcare and NAFTA reform, all the things that were the issues of the day. And I thought I needed to know them inside out. Well, when you get there, even though you're selected out of 2,000, they choose a class of 17, you still have to find out where you're going to fit and which agency you're going to work with, which agency head you're going to work with. So I went to 7 different interviews and I'm ready to talk about healthcare reform and NAFTA. And every single one of them asked me about faith. They said, I'm thinking I have to be a Washington insider. And the Washington insiders are like, we need you to help us get inside of us. That
Wow.
We sometimes lose ourselves. In this place, we burn out, we work all the time. And so we need someone to help us stay spiritually grounded. So I got 7 offers, from agencies of working with them. So when I get back to the White House Fellows Office, they're like, what did you do? And it was not an answerable question. It was like, my faith did what it did. And so I ended up working in the White House and not knowing how meaningful faith was to President Bill Clinton and particularly the Black church. So I'm coming down the hall, my second week on the job, walking down the hall from one of the meetings, there are tons of meetings all day. And I feel this arm embrace me. And I look up and it's President Clinton.
Oh, my.
And he says, so you're the Baptist preacher. I hear we got a Baptist preacher in our class. And I'm speechless. I did an oh my. And you're trying to get words out. And I'm like, this is the President of the United States. Fast forward, he says, well, I have a couple of conferences I can't attend next week. So my office is going to contact you. Do you think you can go for me? What? What?
Oh, my God.
Do you think I can? Yes, Mr. President. And the irony of it all was when I left New York that year, one of the Baptist conventions who were very sexist had basically said, you can't come in. That was the first event I had to go and represent President Clinton at, where I was the White House representative in the place that they said I could not come in, but I was coming in faith for the President of the United States. I will never forget that moment. Their mouths dropped and I said, thank you, God. And so I think those kind of doors just opened, and I don't think you can make those open. I think your faith and your gifts make room for you, as the scriptures say in Proverbs. And so you're thankful. You try to be humble, because if you try to get arrogant about it, I think your knees are chopped off spiritually and literally. But I just think you authentically take your faith with you. It's not your faith life and my work life. I think I am a human being that has faith, and I also work. I'm an entrepreneur, and the two worlds come together. You don't separate who you are. Now, some places, you have to be corporately sensitive. You can't always just come out and say, I'm going to church today on my lunch hour. You have to understand the culture you're in. But one of the things corporations are doing now, and it's growing all over America, they're forming faith ERGs, faith employee relations groups, and they're being asked for. So you have places like Salesforce and American Airlines and some of the larger corporations that are leading the way. So it's just going to be a matter of time when we get through COVID that you're going to be hearing about it's okay to take your faith to work. And we're going to provide time for you and to honor how you do faith. So in some places, they have a room for the Muslims who need to pray 5 times a day. Others are doing like dinners at Hanukkah, or, so people don't have to kind of say happy holidays. You can say Merry Christmas to the Christian. You can say Happy Hanukkah to the Jew. You can say Ramadan to the Muslim and not apologize for it. So I think we're going to see a new culture, a new wave that is hit, because COVID, as I said, is the great equalizer. And people need their faith, whether they're in corporate America, losing their job in corporate America, or not in corporate America.
Exactly. And, for many entrepreneurs, especially in my circle, who are women of purpose, I coach women specifically, more and more they're opening up and saying, I am called to do this.
Yes.
It's God who has called me to do this. And I think the practice has been for me at least, to speak personally, has been to surrender.
Yes.
A lot of surrendering the outcomes, just show me what I need to know, tell me what I need to say, curate my thoughts, and let me just show up authentically. And the power behind that, like you said, with having that global world stage with President Clinton asking you to step in for him. It's like nothing that you could have ever imagined or wished for or asked for.
Or orchestrated. You can't
orchestrated, right.
You can't make this stuff up, So I think your faith, there's a scripture that says your faith shall make you whole. And I have lived that, and unapologetically, unashamedly. And just as you said, I was talking to my cousin last night. She said the word I'm using right now is surrender. I'm surrendering. So that is the word of the day, the word of the week, the word of the month, because ultimately it's not in our hands. We can be prepared when the door opens, but we can't always open the door. And so surrender is the right place to go. And I think you have to revisit it. Like, I was talking with business owners. I had the State of Black Women virtual summit, and so they were talking about business plans, and I was asking them, how often do you have to revisit? And some said, every 5 years, every 10 years, I revisit my business plan because things change, I change, I want to focus on. And I think it's the same thing with the spirit. I think we have to sit down and revisit who we are each decade at least, and kind of where we're going. So now in my early 60s is different than my early 50s. I mean, it's certainly different than my teens. And so I'm more in a reflective, surrender kind of legacy stage, kind of what am I leaving for the women who follow, so that they don't have to knock down the same doors. They don't have to blaze the same trails, but they can walk on the paths that have already been blazed. And I think, you look at it differently, and it's still a faith path and still a faith journey. So I'm getting ready to work with a 50 women ministers who have not had the same opportunities. And so for me, it's about your faith can still play a major role, and as faith leaders, it should play a major role. But these are some other things you can be exposed to that are not limited to just a parish, And so I have what I call the de-smog principles, because smog is when fog and haze all come together and you really can't see well. So I have formed the de-smog principles, and they're 2 G's. So you have to learn how to digitize, energize, strategize, monetize, organize, globalize, and glamorize. And that's my message for today. De-smog principles. That's what every good woman needs to do.
That's amazing. And, as head of Charisma Speakers, you're an amazing speaker. You're an amazing orator. And it's great to have you contribute to the Life After Corporate podcast. Before we go, tell us about your latest initiative and the Global Black Women's Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, thank you for asking. So the Global Black Women's Chamber of Commerce is the first chamber that focuses solely on Black women-owned businesses. For many who know, in America, Black women-owned businesses are the fastest growing sectors in America. And so they're talking about build back better. Well, we've been building back and better. And so we want to make sure that there's a platform for women, for policy initiatives, for collaboration, for connections, for creating new businesses. So we've just created, with our good friend Ivy Ingrid Vanderbilt, 25 Black women-owned distributorships of PPE equipment. People are asking for PPE. Well, you can get it from a she. So we call it She for PPE. And so people can find us at globalblackwomencc.org. globalblackwomencc.org. And the CC stands for Chamber of Commerce. And I also want to commend to folks the book that everyone's asking for. Is a book that I did years ago, but it's called Too Blessed to Be Stressed, Words of Wisdom for Women on the Move. Too Blessed to Be Stressed, Words of Wisdom for Women on the Move. And I wrote it when I was bouncing back from burnout. And so it's scriptural steps to how your faith can take you through your journey. Knowing when to leave, knowing whose you are, knowing when it's time for a timeout, taking a day of rest, having some boundaries. Yes, some boundaries, some days off and some days where people can't find you. So I hope that I commend those to everyone. And I thank you so much for asking for that.
Oh, of course. And the Selah break, which is also something that pause to reflect, pause to stop action, and pause to just be. So beautiful advice, a wonderful and inspiring story, Ambassador Sujay. And thank you so much for sharing it with the Life After Corporate listeners today.
It's my pleasure. And people can find me on sujayonsocial.live. They don't have to try to figure out my Facebook handle or my Instagram, Sujay, Sujay on social.live, because I'm all the way live and in living color. Thank you, Deb.
I know. And catch Sundays with Sujay. And what is it, your Wednesday lunch hour with Power?
Your lunch hour of power, Wednesdays at noon, 12 noon live on YouTube. They can find me with Live with Sujay and Sundays with Sujay on Facebook Live.
Thank you so much, Sujay. Such a pleasure hosting you on Life After Corporate today. We'll talk real soon.
Okay, my pleasure.
Wow, my friend, that was some episode. Ambassador Suzan Johnson Cook is one accomplished woman in business. And I would love for you to take a moment and share your reflections about this episode in a rating and review on iTunes. It means so much to us to know that you are listening to this podcast and you're getting value out of the amazing guests that I'm bringing before you. And that's it for now, my friend. Till next time. Thanks for listening, my friend. If you enjoyed this show, please head over to iTunes and subscribe and leave us a review. And be sure to hop over to the Life After Corporate Facebook group and join other growing entrepreneurs to get weekly tips on how to create more money and meaning doing work you love.